His return, of course, was only possible because he had become an Irish citizen through the direct intervention of Sean Lemass. And throughout his life, my father would never hear a bad word said about Fianna Fáil. Of course, he didn't live to see the Troika arrive here. One curious thing, I think I'm revealing a crime here, but the statute of limitations has passed. He altered dozens of passports. Maybe there are people here who had a passport that he altered for Waterford Glass employees coming from Eastern Europe for what used to be called the Polish National Cutting Room in Johnstown. He was an expert at changing the expiration dates on foreign passports with a sharp blade and special architect's inks. This is why the government introduced digital passports. And he once created an entire West German passport for a Polish national he was recruiting for the blowing room. And you know what? He never made one for himself, which would have been a good idea. So he stayed, he met and he married Betty, and spent the next 61 years of his life in this country until his death in 2008. It took 15 years for his mother to be allowed out of Czechoslovakia, to even speak to him. They didn't speak for 15 years, and to visit his family in Ireland. And in all that time, they communicated only by long letters. And when she came in 1962, in the middle of the Cold War, it was such an unusual event that RTE sent a news crew to Waterford to film the event of this woman at her family in Waterford. And I can remember posing on the swing in the back garden for RTE. I was 3 or 4 years of age. Miroslav's mother, Anna, came from a landlocked country. She had never seen the ocean, and she spent many happy hours transfixed by the breaking waves on the beach in Tremor and in Dunmore. And she forgot all about the warnings she'd issued to her son in these letters to avoid seawater, because Czechs always thought that seawater would make your hair fall out and turn yellow. His father, František, made only one trip, and that was 2 years later. Remember, he and Anna were never allowed out of the country together for the fear that they might defect, even though they were already in their late 60s. There was an obsession at that time with defection, because if you recall, the Cuban Missile Crisis was occurring around this time. Now, Franta loved fish and chips, and the little fishing boats had done more, and he loved the conviviality and the freedom of Ireland, even in those days, and he told his son, a few days before he had to go, that he wanted to stay and not to return to that prison in Czechoslovakia. He'd already been destroyed by the communists, and he himself was now working in a uranium mine to the great detriment of his health. My grandfather was a rogue, a heavy drinker. He's totally different from my father. From my father, yes, totally different. And even though he knew that defecting made no sense, and that his wife would surely go to a real prison, yet this big aggressive man came to my father the day before he left with tears in his eyes, and he said, Miroslav, simple words, I want to stay. I want to stay. Well, he couldn't stay, and he never came back. There are many highlights from the wondrous career of my father, and I've only time to remember a few. He was an absolute master of the arts of making and shaping heavy lead crystal, including designing and blowing and polishing and the freehand arts of cutting and engraving and sculpting. And he was steeped in a 1,000-year history of Bohemian glassmaking. A combination of skills, ladies and gentlemen, that will not be seen again in this mechanized age, when there's now a robot machine, and some of you may have seen those machines at Kilbarry, that can even mimic the famous Waterford wedge cut. Not ideal, but can do a good imitation. And the Chinese have also developed a mechanical ability to do that. He even designed the packaging for the glass, and he designed the famous trademark, which is actually a seahorse, not a dolphin, as a lot of people thought. Dolphin, of course, is on the coat of arms of Waterford City, but that is a seahorse. He designed it. Here he is in a typical pose in his studio in the giant Kilbarry facility, once the world's largest crystal glass factory, and now sadly flattened. It's such a tragedy, and only a distant memory. He was a great industrial designer, as I said, and I mentioned Lismore and the other classical suites. And here are examples of 2 celebrity chandeliers. This 4,000-piece monster he designed for Jackie Kennedy and installed in the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. It's made of the same metal that was used to make aircraft parts for Aer Lingus. And he went to New York, to Washington, to assemble that chandelier. And then the 1965 masterpiece, his chandeliers in the central nave of Westminster Abbey. A gift to the United Kingdom from the Guinness family to mark the 900th anniversary of the Abbey, and this series had 8,000 pieces. Pretty impressive. Now Miroslav scaled these monsters down and created another effective Waterford product called the home chandelier, which became one of Waterford's most successful enterprises. And by the way, I was reminded tonight by members of the Society that there are some beautiful examples of his work in the Theatre Royal. And when the Theatre Royal was rebuilt and the lobby was restored, he created a special chandelier for that location. Noel Griffin, the former managing director of Waterford Crystal, once said that the little company that made beer glasses for Waterford city publicans was now installing chandeliers in Westminster Abbey and the Kennedy Centre. He did sports trophies, which became the single most effective marketing concept for Waterford in the United States. Now remember, the Penroses catered to the Anglo-Irish nobility of the 18th century. Waterford Crystal in the 20th century catered to the modern nobility of the sports stars and the Hollywood stars and the US politicians. Practically the entire US Senate showed up in Kilbarry in the 1980s, along with Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire. So he was an industrial designer for the mass market, but he was also an artist in glass and creator of some of the most fine crystal sculptures of the 20th century. He took solid blocks of high-density crystal. These were not cut or engraved, they were solid blocks, and using the spinning copper wheels instead of a chisel, as you would on marble or stone, he made representational and abstract forms, including the Concorde for Air France. This was an actual scale model, scale reproduction, using Concorde design blueprints, and was a gift to the chairman of Air France on the inaugural flight of the Concorde from Paris to Rio de Janeiro. This is a nice one. Bishop Michael Russell of Waterford commissioned this gift for Pope Paul VI on the canonization of Oliver Plunkett in 1976. Bishop Russell hid the gift under his cassock as he and the other Irish bishops approached the Pope, and then he produced it in front of the Pope. The Pope was surprised, but the other bishops were appalled and annoyed that they hadn't thought of something like this. You know how the bishops are. A couple of American themes. Here he is grinning with Muhammad Ali. Am I going backwards? Grinning with Muhammad Ali in New York, and a New York theme. A model of the Statue of Liberty in crystal, presented to President Ronald Reagan for the statue's bicentennial in 1986. Miroslav appeared at that occasion with Garrett Fitzgerald, where Fitzgerald presented the statue on behalf of the people of Ireland for the bicentennial. The museum under the statue now houses Dad's model of the statue, and he said at the time that it made a pleasant change from Taoiseach going over with big bowls filled with shamrocks. Notice that the folds on the draperies are identical. The draperies of the dress are identical on the front and the back, avoiding any distracting reflections through the statue and giving the sculpture a unified appearance. Miroslav carried the gift from the Irish people in his hand luggage on Aer Lingus. I mean, how would you do that today? You certainly couldn't do that today. And here we finish our slides. There he is again with the statue. I finished the slides with this picture just before his retirement, standing on the south lawn of the White House with Reagan and Fitzgerald. I love this picture because Dad has a ramrod straight posture and is gesticulating as though he's welcoming the president rather than the other way around.